In 334 BC, the earth trembled under the march of a king who would reshape the world itself. He led his army into the unknown, pushing forward through every battle, and setting his sights on the mighty Persian Empire, the greatest force to ever rule the East. His path was one of destruction and glory. Lands that once seemed untouchable now fell before the hooves of his horses. Cities crumbled, and new ones were founded in his honor. Governing an empire spanning continents, kingdoms, and cultures, he did not just conquer, he transcended. His legend became the blueprint for power, echoing through the minds of leaders for millennia. They say people only truly die when their name is spoken for the last time, but this man will live forever as Alexander the Great. Our story begins in Pella, the capital city of the Kingdom of Macedon. King Philip II and one of his many wives, Olympias, had a baby. According to the biographer Plutarch, Olympias dreamed that her womb was struck by lightning just before she conceived Alexander. He must be the son of Zeus! I mean, mythologically speaking, being the son of Zeus isn't that impressive, since like half of Greece could claim that. Fair enough. Either way, his mother had huge ambitions, and instilled a sense of destiny in him, that his fate was to conquer the Persian Empire. Alexander grew up like a true Macedonian noble, mastering the arts of horseback riding, music, combat, hunting, and reading. At the ripe age of 10, he faced a challenge that would reveal his bold spirit. A wild horse brought by a traitor to King Philip that resisted every attempt to be mounted. Take it away. No, I'll tame the beast. Huh, it seems like it's afraid of its own shadow. This should do the trick. My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you. Just make sure not to overdo it. I'm sure I won't. Attaboy. Anyway, I bought you the horse. I'll name you Ox-Headed. Let's stick to the untranslated name of Bucephalus, Kid. When Alexander turned 13, Philip started searching for a tutor, and he landed on none other than Aristotle. He taught him about philosophy, medicine, religion, logic, art, and morals. Some people are natural slaves. Wait, what? According to Plutarch, Alexander also had a violent temper and an impulsive nature. He was stubborn when receiving orders from his father, but was open to reasoned debate. He had a calmer side, calculating and logical, and a great desire for knowledge thanks to Aristotle's teachings. He had great self-restraint in pleasures of the body, but in contrast, he liked to drink a lot. His father Philip was pretty expansionist. He wanted to unite the fragmented Greek city-states and exert Macedonian supremacy, but Athens and Thebes were having none of it, and they formed an anti-Macedonian alliance. So he waged war against the Thracians to the north to consolidate his power in the region, and left Alexander as regent. When he returned, they both marched south through Thermopylae and took it from its Theban garrison. Philip then captured the city of Amphissa and sent one final peace offer to Athens and Thebes, but they both rejected it. The Macedonian king then marched and met the city-states at Chaeronea. But before we jump into it, allow me to explain a bit of ancient warfare to you. This is a Greek hoplite. They were soldiers armed with spears and shields, who formed phalanx formations to be effective in war with fewer soldiers. But Philip came and said, hey, what if we gave them longer spears, like up to 20 feet long? We'll name them sarissas, and our soldiers will be able to poke without being poked. I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier. Oh, I'm not even finished. Macedonian horses are very big and strong, and Thessalian ones are quick and resilient. We should integrate them more within the army and coordinate them with the infantry to exploit our enemies' weaknesses. And so he did. Philip trusted the Thessalian and Macedonian cavalry to Alexander on the left flank, whilst infantry armed with traditional spears were located to their right. The Macedonian phalangites were deployed in the center, wielding the comically long sarissa. To their right, more light infantry with the shorter spears, commanded by Philip himself, and a handful of javelin men and archers. On the other hand, the enemy troops consisted entirely of hoplites from Athens and Thebes on the sides, and mercenaries in the center, with the elite Theban infantry located on their right side. They were called the Sacred Band, and they consisted of 115 male couples. Now, Philip wasn't known for engaging all of his lines at the same time. He hit hard in a specific place, and Chaeronea was no exception. He advanced his light infantry and missile troops and started harassing the Athenian hoplites. Philip's troops were unable to break the enemy ranks, and Alexander ordered the remaining lines to advance, to avoid isolating his father's contingent and to apply pressure to the Greek allies and keep them put. It was at this moment that Philip began to retreat his troops in an orderly fashion. The Athenians gave chase and broke ranks, believing the enemy to be on the run. Alexander then mimicked his father's moves and withdrew at his pace. A portion of the mercenary troops then gave support to the Athenians and engaged part of the Macedonian phalanx. flanks. Alexander gave the order and cut through the whole battlefield, whilst the rest of the army followed. He encircled the coalition center, making use of the elite and ultra-fast Thessalian cavalry, and charged at them from behind. Within a few minutes, the Greek lines started breaking ranks and fleeing. Only the brave Sacred Band fought until the end in an epic last stand after being completely surrounded. The 300 warriors died in the battle. Macedonian losses were not recorded, but the casualties for both sides were strangely low, despite hours of battle. Philip was Alexander's most immediate and influential role model. As the young Alexander watched him campaign every year, he developed the competitive side of his personality. He had to outdo his father, which explained his reckless behavior during the battle. With key Greek city-states captured, Philip then turned to Sparta and warned them that, "If I invade Laconia, I shall turn you out." The Spartans then proceeded to reply with what must be the coldest response in all of history: "If." A Hellenic alliance called the League of Corinth was established to unify Greek military forces under Macedonian leadership. Philip then turned his attention to the literal elephant in the room, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. But I first need to attend my daughter's wedding. Ouch. Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards at the wedding for still debated reasons, and Alexander was crowned king on the spot by the nobles and the army at the age of 20. Oh, and execute my cousin Amyntas, his arrival to the throne. I wonder what Thebes, Athens, Thessaly, and the Thracian tribes think of Philip's death. Yup, they're revolting. Alexander was advised to use diplomacy, like his father Philip, but Alexander wasn't his father Philip. Prepare 3,000 of the finest Macedonian horses. I'm riding south. He found the Thessalian army blocking the pass between Mount Olympus and Mount Ossa, and ordered his men to ride over the latter during the night. When the Thessalians awoke the next day and saw the Macedonians on the rear, they surrendered, and Alexander added their elite cavalry to his force. Wait, who's this guy? Meet Diogenes, a philosopher who embraced a life of self-sufficiency and poverty, who challenged societal norms and became famous for his unconventional behaviors, such as living in a barrel or walking around public spaces with a lit lantern in daylight. He's not a relevant character in the video, but I just wanted to include this alleged encounter with the main character. Greetings, Diogenes. Is there anything you want? Yes. Stand a little out of my sun. His followers then laughed, and Alexander said, "But truly, if I were not Alexander, I wish I were Diogenes." My king, Athens has sued for peace. Excellent. But the Thracians and the Illyrians are still revolting. Well, that should put an end to the uprising. Thebes and Athens are revolting once again. Well, that should put an end to the uprising. And it did. Alexander made an example of Thebes, burning it to the ground and selling its people into slavery. A bit of an overkill if you ask me, but Athens eventually stopped the rebellion and Greece was temporarily at peace. He finally could set his eyes on Asia. But why Asia, you may ask? Well, some 150 years ago, some Greek colonies under Persian rule in Asia Minor revolted with Athenian support. King Darius I of Persia launched an invasion of Greece in retaliation, but the Athenians won a stunning victory at the Battle of Marathon. Darius' successor, Xerxes I, mounted a massive invasion. He got close to conquering the whole of Greece, but some 300 Spartans, who you most likely haven't heard of, made a legendary last stand at Thermopylae and held the pass for 3 days, inflicting heavy casualties on the Persian side, fighting to the death. Soon after, the Greek navy defeated the Persians at the Battle of Salamis, and the following year, Greek forces won a decisive victory at Plataea, ending for once and for all the Persian threat. My king, how will we handle the security of our army's rear whilst conducting operations deep into enemy territory? Easy. We'll just conquer the whole Afro-Asian coastline too. It will just take us a couple more years. I'm not gonna see my wife and kids in over a decade, right? You're not gonna see your in-laws in over a decade. I'm in. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 6,000 cavalry and a fleet of 120 ships, with crews numbering 32,000. After the crossing, Alexander threw a spear to the soil and said, "I accept Asia as a gift from the gods." Well, this is awkward. As soon as Alexander landed, the Persians awaited him at the river Granicus, where the first of 3 major battles would take place. The Persians had approximately 10,000 Greek mercenaries within their ranks, but as they were fighting against fellow countrymen, they got placed at the rear for good measure. Alexander ignored the advice of his most trusted officer, Parmenion, to wait until dawn to cross the river and attacked immediately, in an attempt to buy some time for the rest of his army to cross it. He struck the Persian line with his companion cavalry and a squadron of high pass rapists. Meanwhile, the Persians were trying hard to prevent the Greek army from crossing the river. Alexander was in the thick of the battle when he got attacked by two Persian nobles. One hit him on the head with his sword, which broke a piece of his helmet, but the young king quickly struck him with his spear. But then, from behind, the other one raised his sword against Alexander, ready to deliver a blow that would have changed the course of history forever. However, Cleitos the Black, one of Alexander's officers, foresaw the blow and cut off the Persian noble's arm, saving the Macedonian king's life. The Greek phalangites were finally across the river, and they started wreaking havoc among the Persian cavalry. As well, spearmen are super effective and counter cavalry in most games and in real life. Most of the cavalry fled. Now, you're probably wondering, what about these guys? Well, Alexander's speed meant they didn't even have the chance to engage in the battle, and Alexander regarded them as Greek traitors, so this is what happened to them. After this victory, Alexander accepted the surrender of the Persian provincial capital of Sardis and proceeded to capture the cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus to deny the Persians their naval bases and preserve his lines of communication back to Greece. After securing the coast, Alexander moved inland into Gordium. There, he was shown the famous Gordian knot, tied by King Gordius of Phrygia. The prophecy said that whoever untied it would rule all of Asia. You know, it makes no difference how the knot is untied. Better luck next time, Eduardicus Cicerhandopoulos. You could have become king of Asia. Alexander then crossed the Taurus mountains into Cilicia, where he almost died of pneumonia after swimming in the cold Cydnus River. Anyway, he continued his conquest, but as soon as he was about to cross the Nur mountains into modern-day Syria, the Persian army, commanded by King Darius III himself, emerged from behind. Darius was determined to end the Macedonian threat once and for all, and he blocked Alexander's only escape route. The Persian king outnumbered him 2-1. The odds were not in Alexander's favor, but he did have one slight advantage over Darius. Even though he had no escape, the narrow battlefield meant that the Persian king couldn't utilize all of his troops at once, equalizing the playing field. After a galvanizing speech by Alexander, where he even called out some soldiers by their names, he charged. Parmenion and his center clashed first. Then, Alexander and his companions delivered a critical strike to Darius's left flank. He then engaged the 2nd Infantry line, and after some fighting, he broke through them. But things weren't looking good for the rest of the Macedonians. Parmenion was outnumbered, and his phalangites were getting pushed against the river. Alexander surveyed the battlefield from his position and charged straight at the rear. In the struggle that ensued, the Persians suffered many losses, and it's even said that Darius may have injured Alexander in the leg, but the Persian king fled the battlefield. When the Persians saw that their king had withdrawn, they started retreating as well. The Macedonian army pursued the fleeing Persians until sunset. The slaughter that occurred as the disorganized Persians tried to escape explains the grim casualties estimate that modern historians give of the battle. Darius's army collapsed. During his escape, he left behind his mother, his wife, and his 2 daughters, captured alive by Alexander and well treated by him. Darius tried to sue for peace by offering the already lost lands and a ransom of 10,000 talents for his family, to which Alexander replied, "I am now king of Asia. I decide the territorial divisions." He wasted no time subduing coastal cities in Phoenicia along his path. However, the small island of Tyre resisted. The city was half a mile off the coast and had walls right up to the sea around the entire island. Alexander besieged it for months with no results. After growing impatient, he made an excellent use of free will and literally constructed a causeway out of stone and built 2 giant siege towers at the end, with catapults. It was a genius idea, but it failed. The Tyrians counterattacked by launching a ship on fire filled with flammable material towards both towers, which of course burnt them down. Alexander then changed plans and decided to refit some of his galleys with battering rams. He removed the Tyrian coastal defenses with crane ships. Mind you, we're talking about 332 BC here. The rams managed to breach the walls, and the young king quickly captured the city. Alexander's punishment to the Tyrians was harsh. He had wasted more than half a year just to take a small island, which by the way is not an island anymore, thanks to Alexander. So he crucified 2,000 Tyrians on the beach and sold 30,000 people into slavery. Yikes. To no one's surprise, most of the towns on the route to Egypt surrendered, but he was once again met with some resistance in Gaza. The city was built on top of a hill 60 feet high, and with a fortified wall surrounding it. Alexander's engineers said that a siege would be impossible. During the siege that followed, it's said that a crow threw a clump of dry mud on Alexander's head. He then consulted his personal soothsayer on this bad omen. Give it to me straight, Aristander. How bad is it? "The city will fall, my king, but harm will come to you during the fight." Arab mercenaries then surprise attacked the Greek troops, but Alexander answered hastily and took control of the situation, although he was injured in doing so by a projectile straight to the shoulder. But he survived. Knowing that only the first half of Alexander's prediction had yet to happen, Alexander began another pharaonic feat of engineering. This Macedonian king will never breach the city walls. They are just too high up. Wait, is he Macedonian or Greek? Dude, who cares? I'm sure the comment section will be civilized about it. Son of a gun. Over the course of several weeks, Alexander ordered his troops to build a mound around the city walls. Artillery was placed surrounding them, and the walls were breached, effectively ending the siege, with yet again another victory for Alexander. And, well, the city's military commander was dragged outside the city walls by a chariot. Yeah, executions were brutal in the classical era. One Arab mercenary, pretending to be a deserter, threw himself before Alexander, asking for pardon. Suddenly, the mercenary unsheathed his sword and launched at the Macedonian king. Alexander evaded the attack by shifting to the side, but suffered a minor injury before the mercenary was killed. While in Egypt, he restored the temples neglected by the Persians and dedicated many monuments to the Egyptian gods. He founded the city of Alexandria and was regarded as a liberator. The oracle of the Siwa Oasis even pronounced him the son of Amun Zeus. What? A mix of the Egyptian god Amun and the Greek god Zeus. Come on, dude. We knew, Philip. Zeus isn't your dad. You obviously don't know your mythology if you think a woman being married ever stopped Zeus. Fair enough. After completing his side quest of becoming a pharaoh, Alexander left Egypt to pursue his total Persian conquest. But Darius wasn't planning on going out without a rematch. He assembled a massive army, ranging from 80 to 140,000 men, according to modern estimates, and faced Alexander at the Battle of Gaugamela. The Persian king chose an open terrain, so his army didn't suffer the same restraints as in Issus. The terrain had also been previously flattened by his soldiers, and bushes had been ripped off the ground to make it suitable for the Persian war chariots, which were placed at the front, along with the Armenian, Indian, and Scythian cavalry. The Syrian and Babylonian infantry were placed at the back, and they were possibly accompanied by a handful of the dreaded Indian elephants. However, they most likely were withdrawn before the start of the battle due to fatigue. Once again, Alexander's army was smaller than Darius's, maybe even being outnumbered 2-1, but Alexander deployed his units as usual and initiated his attack by advancing his wing to the right. Darius copied his move and tried to outflank Alexander and stop him from abandoning the zone they had cleared for the Persian chariots. But this was Alexander's plan all along. He wanted to weaken the Persian center and open up a gap. A cavalry battle formed on the right wing, and Alexander was forced to use reserves to contain the Scythians, as he was outnumbered. Darius then ordered his chariots to charge straight at the enemy, but Alexander's javelin throwers made sure to take out many of the chariots before they reached the ranks of the Macedonian army. The few surviving ones passed through alleys created by Alexander's men, and were finished off by the Hypaspists. After both centers clashed, Alexander's companion cavalry and parts of the Macedonian phalanx charged straight at the weakened Persian center. Alexander went straight for Darius himself. "My king, I believe Alexander is charging straight at us." "Alexander, you say?" "Yeah, I mean, he looks just like him. What should we..." I should have known. The sheer aggressiveness of Alexander's assault caused the center of the Persian army to break. King Darius led the retreat, but the battle was far from over. The Macedonian left flank was in serious trouble. Alexander was faced with a dilemma. He could give chase to the Persian king to kill him and end the war with one stroke, but risk losing a large number of men. Or he could abandon his pursuit of Darius and help his left wing. "Parmenion, we won't be able to hold them much longer. We're encircled." "Men, it's been an honor fighting alongside you." Alexander chose the second option. This saw the hardest and bloodiest fighting of the whole battle. He lost 60 companions, a devastating blow, but as the Persians learned of Darius' flight, they turned and fled too. The Battle of Gaugamela was a stunning and decisive victory for Alexander, as it allowed him to capture Babylon and Susa, which was a major treasury for the Persian Empire. While Darius was trying to raise a new army at Ecbatana, Alexander advanced along the royal road. After a small battle at the Persian gates, he reached Persepolis. What a beautiful city, right folks? Yeah, what should we do with it? Well, if I'm not mistaken, Xerxes did burn the Athenian Acropolis and the Temple of Athena some 150 years ago, so... Upon learning of Alexander's approaching army, Darius decided to retreat to Bactria. "King Darius, my loyal Bessus, to what do I owe the pleasure? We were thinking you should maybe hand your army over to me. Are you out of your mind? Plan B it is." A group of deserting Persians informed Alexander of what had happened, and he quickly sent a scouting party. But according to some accounts, when the Macedonians arrived, this happened. This wasn't what I intended. Alexander gave Darius a royal funeral in Persepolis. I will defeat the usurper. Bessus, I'm coming for you. Bessus retreated into Central Asia, ready to launch a guerrilla campaign against Alexander. It was at this time that Alexander learned that a plot to assassinate him had been kept a secret by Philotas, the commander of his companion cavalry. Alexander had him executed, but it didn't end there. In a move that would put the entire Game of Thrones franchise to shame, Alexander sent assassins to kill Philotas' father too, before he heard of his son's death and could turn against his king. His father was none other than Parmenion. My king, Alexander has marched on Frada and has founded the city of Alexandria Arachosia. What should we do? Nothing. We're safe here. Only a madman would cross the Hindu Kush mountains while they are still covered in snow and ice. Alexander has just crossed the Hindu Kush mountains while they are still covered in snow and ice. Bessus was caught completely by surprise and retreated north across the Oxus River. He burned all available ships to prevent the Macedonians from crossing. That should do the trick. Only a madman would cross the river without ships. Alexander is crossing the river without ships by building rafts with animal skins. Honestly, at this point, he just deserves the win. Say less. Let me explain this act of treason. Following his initial victories in deep Persian territory, Alexander began adopting elements of Persian dress and customs at court. With the aim of securing the support and aid of the Persian upper classes, he started to look and act like one, costing him the sympathies of many of his countrymen. Does he want us to kiss the ground before him? Who does he think he is? A god. It's very possible that Alexander didn't think of himself as a god, but in Persian culture, the king was treated as divine. So maybe he was just playing the part to keep the empire together. This suggested that he planned to continue the administrative system of the Persian Empire, as he had not only pardoned many of his former opponents, but had also allowed them to rule their satrapies, which were essentially provinces of the Persian Empire governed by a satrap. This meant that the local leaders in Central Asia would be allowed to maintain their authority, so they now regarded Bessus as a threat to the status quo and handed him over to Alexander. Now, the details of his execution are pretty gruesome. So let's just say that they got two very bendy trees, they tied Bessus to both of them, and yeah, executions were brutal in the classical era. This is it, right? They'll bow down to me as long as they keep their positions of power. Actually, the satrapy of Sogdiana has revolted against you. That should put an end to the uprising. And how would you name the newly founded city, my king? Philippia Escate, in honor of my father. Just kidding, I'm naming it Alexandria. But Alexander couldn't just finally rest and watch the sun rise on a grateful universe, because the Scythians would regularly attack the city, but he was able to defeat them at the Battle of Jaxartes and secure his northern frontier. Alright everyone, I will now announce a reorganization of commands. You will follow me into India and help me expand my new empire eastwards. You will command the elite Thessalian cavalry, and you, Clytus, the man who saved my life at Granicus, will take second-rate Greek mercenaries who formerly fought for the Persians up north in case those pesky Scythians attack again. This is preposterous. You're out of your mind. Philip would never. Nonsense. I've accomplished far greater things than my father, and I'm a better Macedonian king. Oh, you're no Macedonian. And you surely are no king. You dress just like them. You're not one of us anymore. The room went so silent, you could hear a pin drop. Alexander grabbed an apple from a table and threw it at Clytus. The latter stormed towards him, but was escorted out of the room by Alexander's guards. Phew. This could have ended so much worse. Anyway, as I was saying, and by the way, your father Philip was a much better king. Alexander regretted it instantly. It is said that he even tried to drive the pike through himself after what he had done, thinking that it was not proper for him to kill his friend. He was stopped by his guards. After this ordeal, he marched east and besieged the city of Massaga, and following some intense fighting, the city finally surrendered. The ruler of Taxila had formed an alliance with the Macedonian king, and they both marched to face King Porus, the king of Paravas, at the Battle of the Hydaspes. It was Alexander's costliest battle, as the Indian war elephants decimated the Greek ranks, but in the end, Porus's army was no match for Alexander's cavalry and his javelin men. In the center, after being harassed by sarissas and javelins, the elephants fled and trampled over the Roman troops, causing massive casualties. Even though the Indian king intended to fight to the death, he was eventually captured and was allowed to retain his lands. This was Alexander's last great battle, and he had never lost one, despite being typically outnumbered. Alright, this is where the fun begins. Men, we must continue expanding eastward. The Nanda Empire of Magadha awaits, and even further east, the Gangaridai Empire of Bengal. Please let this not be a Kleidos 2.0. We're done, Alexander. We've been campaigning with you for 8 years now. I want to see my kids, my parents, and my wife. Even even my mother-in-law. This river thus marked the easternmost extent of Alexander's Macedonian empire, stopped not by a foreign ruler or a massive army, but by his own men and their wish to return home. What a wholesome era of mankind, if you exclude the torture, executions, and assassinations. On his way back, Alexander even had time to conquer the Mali people before reaching the coast, but not without first taking an arrow through the lung and almost bleeding out. Yeah, he survived this. Very well. Seeing as the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf are still uncharted waters to us, some of you will have the privilege of taking this short, scenic route in order to explore the coastline. The rest of you will travel with me through this treacherous and harsh desert. Alexander crossed the Jedrosha Desert, located nowadays in southern Pakistan, and lost many men, as food and water were scarce. In fact, he barely made it himself. Ancient accounts depict him as having suffered life-threatening dehydration, but he survived. Once he reached Persepolis, he learned that many of his satraps had been ruling unjustly during his absence, so to no one's surprise, he executed them. At Susa, he arranged for an enormous mass wedding of Macedonian officers to Persian noblewomen to strengthen the bonds between his two kingdoms. He understood the difficulties of ruling culturally different people and wanted to homogenize them through family ties. But this was not well received by his army. They mutinied a second time at Opis, criticizing the adoption of Persian customs and dress and the introduction of Persian officers and soldiers into Macedonian units. Alexander responded as usual, by executing the ringleaders and then giving a galvanizing speech to his men, reminding them of the glories they had won together. But this moment would mark the beginning of the end for Alexander. He traveled to Ecbatana to retrieve the bulk of the Persian treasure, and then tragedy struck. Alexander's closest friend, Hephaestion, died of either poisoning or illness. The young king was distraught. Hephaestion's death devastated him, and he ordered a decree for public mourning, along with the preparation of an expensive funeral pyre in Babylon. Now I know what you're thinking. Was he just his friend, or something more? We will never know, but what's certain is that he was at the very least his homie. After Hephaestion's death, Alexander started to exhibit signs of megalomania. And I mean, who could blame him? His empire spanned 3 continents, and he was surrounded by yes-men. He had boundless ambition. It's even said by various sources that he planned on conquering the whole world. In 323 BC, Alexander marched to Babylon. After crossing the Tigris River, he was met by people from the Chaldea region. So, our god Bel just told us that you're going to die if you set foot in Babylon at this time. But I've arranged a meeting of many embassies of European and African leaders to recognize my greatness there. We could just place a random guy on the Babylonian throne to take the omen for you. Awesome. According to some accounts, they did just that. But unfortunately for Alexander, Bel wasn't easily fooled. During a banquet with his officers, Alexander started feeling unwell. For my next conquest, I'm planning an invasion of Arabia. What's wrong? I feel a bit queasy. What the flip? He developed a fever, which worsened until he was unable to speak, and ended up dying after some agony. Typhoid fever or alcoholic liver disease are one of the most popular theories. However, we're talking about Macedonian aristocracy here, assassinations galore, so let's not rule out poisoning as a possible explanation. His body surprisingly took 6 days to start decomposing, and he was placed inside a golden sarcophagus filled with honey to the brim. On the way to Macedon, it was seized and taken to Memphis, and then transferred to Alexandria. Nowadays, its location remains unknown, and it has never been found. With no apparent clear heir, Macedonian unity collapsed, and after some war, the Hellenistic world settled into the Kingdom of Macedon, the Kingdom of Thrace, the Seleucid Empire, and the Ptolemaic Kingdom. An empire this big and diverse could have only remained united by a great leader, a man of great charisma and force of personality. An empire this big and diverse could have only remained united by Alexander the Great. At my age, he had conquered the world, and I have done nothing. But that will change real soon, I promise. Julius, are you coming? Yes. I'll come, I'll see, and I'll conquer.